one creature vocalizing, it seems to be multiple creatures vocalizing. And then they surround your camp, and you feel like you can't leave. That's exactly what happened to my guest tonight, Jack. He was out camping, and he had a very, very terrifying night. He's also had a few other encounters. But before we get to Jack, I want to bring Stu on. Some of you might remember Stu from the Christmas tree episode. Stu is here in Washington State, and I sent Stu out to an area where I've been getting a lot of reports and asked him to take a look around, and Stu was gracious enough to go out there and check it out. Stu, what happened when you were out there?
Yeah, it was actually Saturday night. It was 12:30. I was getting ready to leave a buddy's house, go home, and he called me a wuss and said, don't go home. I told him I was done, and he said, you know what? Let's go out to that spot and do a little nighttime investigation. Didn't take much convincing. We jumped in the car, and we split to the spot. Upon getting to the spot, we were just kind of looking around. There's an area where nobody lives on it. There's not even any power on it. It's used as a wildlife preserve. That's an area that we actually sat and we watched the banks for a while. And, we saw some deer coming down to the water to drink, and that was pretty cool. But once we got in the car and we started heading just around the area, and we were going about 20 miles an hour. We had the windows down. I wanted to be able to hear anything that was out there. I had come across a tree that had been pushed over. And this caught my eye because it was the only tree that had fallen over. And I remember hearing a theory that stick formations and things like that are made by large males to let any other males passing through the area know that he's there. I don't know how much water that holds, but I decided I was going to take a look. We pulled over to the side of the road, and we are on the side of a road. I mean, it's a 2-lane road. I walked up to that tree, and I noticed a few things right off the bat. Number one, like I said, no other tree around it was dead or damaged due to snowfall, nothing like that. But I also noticed that there was a lot of broken and twisted branches laying on the left side of the tree. The tree had been pushed over to the right. If those branches came off of that tree, they were laying on the wrong side of the tree. So right there it indicated to me that something had twisted and broke those branches off before pushing it over. As we're standing there, and it's pitch black out there, we got out of the car and, we're standing on the side of this 2-lane highway. It's pitch black out there. We have flashlights, and I hear one whoop, and it was about 50 yards or so from me. And that was followed up by a second whoop. And that was a little further away, 100, 200 yards. But it was the third whoop that really got me, because the third whoop came from behind us across the highway from us. So immediately, and neither of us, myself nor my buddy, are small guys, don't scare easily. We realized that we were surrounded, and both of us turned into little schoolgirls. We could not get back into the car fast enough. It was a pretty terrifying experience, just knowing that a Sasquatch is in the area, which, we went out there looking for him, so it shouldn't be that big of a surprise, but it's always a surprise. But knowing that we were surrounded, that's what really started to get to me. So we get, and a little side note, in between the time that you and I last talked and right now, I had just re-listened to some old episodes, and I listened to episode 123, and at the end of the episode, you had played some vocalizations recorded in East Texas. The first whoops, it's identical to what we heard up here in Washington State. Identical. I was actually shocked. As a matter of fact, I sent you a text message as soon as I heard it because I freaked out, and that was the identical sound that we heard. The second sound was more of a screamy sound. We didn't hear that one, but the whoops that you played first, those were identical to what we heard. But anyway, we get back into the car, turn on the lights, and we don't go but 15, 20, maybe even 25 feet, and 3 doe flushed out in front of us. I slammed on my brakes and looked in my rearview mirror, and my brake light lit up the road behind us red, and a buck flushed out from behind us. It's my opinion that we stumbled upon a hunting party, and this hunting party had just flushed out all these deer towards the Sasquatch that was across the highway from us. So not only did we have a little excitement and some vocalizations, we might have stumbled across a hunting party, and we got surrounded, and it was one hell of a night.
Yeah, it sounds like one hell of a night, man. You know, that area that you're looking into, and I'm not, for the audience listening, I'm not intentionally trying to be a dick by not saying exactly where he's at, but just so people don't flood the area. This particular area, I mean, there's really no reason for the Sasquatch to leave this area, and I get a ton of reports from this area. Campgrounds in that area, local residents in that area. It's a beautiful, beautiful spot, and I can see why Sasquatch wouldn't leave this area.
And I'm basically going to live there when I'm not working. I'm convinced that this is an area where they don't really have to leave. The snow isn't too hard there. There's year-round food for the deer, and yeah, there's theories that they migrate with the deer, and I happen to agree with a lot of that, but there's no need for the deer to leave this particular area. I'm pretty sure that they're there year-round due to certain reports in different areas not too far from one another. I'm leaning to believe that there's multiple family groups in this area. So I think I got a lot of work to do, and you know, hopefully you can get up and come with us. And nothing would please me more, because there's definitely some exciting things happening out there right now.
No, I'm definitely going to get out there with you guys. And as always, be safe while you're out there. But thanks so much, Stu, for coming on and giving us the update. And I'll be in touch.
No problem. I can't wait till we don't have to be so secretive about it anymore. I really would like to get some like-minded individuals in this area. Everyone stay tuned, because I'm pretty sure we're going to come back with some interesting things.
Thanks, Stu. My first guest tonight is Jack. And Jack was the gentleman I was talking about at the very beginning of the show who had a very frightening encounter. Jack, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me.
When you and I were talking about your encounter, it really reminded me, like I was telling you about, of that cop I had on the show in the Rocky Mountains that had a similar encounter. But and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Can you start from the beginning? Kind of tell us what you were doing and tell us what you experienced, what happened.
Sure. I was doing some field work for a biology class at the time, and I was signing a little just bit of outdoor camping along with it. I was down in kind of the northern Florida area in a swamp, and I had hiked all day, and there was a certain point where I was kind of picking a camping spot at the time, but I had come upon this game trail that was oddly wide. It wasn't one of the hiking trails. Followed it back a little ways into a sort of a storm damaged section of cypress, old growth cypress, and had a lot of knockdowns where the root ball gets pushed up in the air quite high. And I had kind of been walking around, and I crawled up on one of these things, and when I crawled up on it, kind of as soon as I stood up, really, I was at that point probably 14 feet off the ground, plus or minus. I started hearing whoops. Is the only way I can describe it. I've spent some time in South America around howler monkeys, and it was very similar to that. There were a few knocks and bangs and stuff that went along with it, but it was basically timed with right when I crawled up onto this big root ball. Kind of struck me as weird, you know, because it really sounded like monkeys, you know, that deep whoop kind of noise. And there was more than one. You could hear several of them. I guess they had all spotted me or something at the same time, and that was the reaction. But anyway, I ended up setting up camp not terribly far from there. Again, it was along this logging road. I pulled my vehicle off the right-hand side of the logging trail, but I was camping on the left-hand side of the road about, I would say, 20 yards tops in, but the canopy and the kind of the undergrowth was so thick that you really couldn't even see my vehicle from the campsite. But from where my tent was to my vehicle, we'll say is 20 yards, 25 yards tops. So I started setting up camp, and I was in an area where there's quite a bit of bear activity. So I had a rope with me, like a climbing rope. I had tied a few cans along and run it around the perimeter of my camp, just as, I don't know, a little bit of security, peace of mind, whatever.
Yeah.
And then I had started building a fire, and it was kind of right at dusk. And this is I'll kind of warn all your listeners right now, this is a kind of a very long encounter once it started. So, it lasted about 7 or 8 hours. So again, recalling all the details in perfect order it got quite fuzzy, I guess. Plus it was just so very stressful that it was really hard to keep that much time logged correctly in my brain. Now, obviously the first hour or so is by far the most vivid, and then there are points that are, quite memorable beyond that. But I want to stress that it never really stopped once it started. So backing up again, pardon me, I'm building a fire. It's just starting to get dark. I think I've got like maybe the first, flickers of actual flame going. Starting to put on a little bit more of the tinder and the twigs and stuff. I'm facing parallel with the road, and on my right-hand side, somewhere between my truck and I, all of a sudden there was a incredibly loud, I guess you would call it a limb break or something smashing with, sounded like a Louisville Slugger, up against a big tree and just shattering it. Clearly it was a break. It wasn't just or something like that. It was powerful. So much so that I actually feel, kind of the shock wave from it, not just the noise. But it was so close to me that it was startling, not only because it was that close, but, it was between me and my truck. I could definitely tell that it was just on the other side of this little wood line and by the road. At about that same time, maybe again, this adrenaline and stuff kind of throws your perception of time off a little bit, but almost immediately after that break, and almost a perfect triangular pattern, if you were to, draw lines, on the other side of me, I'm not even going to call it anything, two things, were kind of rushed through the bushes and made a whole lot of noise, never got into a sight line or anything like that, but pushing, I would assume, trying to push me towards my car. Now, the confusing part for me is that directly on my other side, something had just made that, limb break or shatter or whatever you want to call it. Something had just done that. So I wasn't going to go anywhere. I wasn't going to move. As far as I could tell, these things had me pinned in one spot, and I was terrified and at the time had no real perspective on any of this and had no idea what to do. So I didn't do anything. And from there, it kept going and going, and I would hear them move around, keeping this triangular shape, and they would kind of just keep repeating what they had been doing. It kind of went in waves where it would ramp up for a minute, and then I wouldn't hear them for a little bit, and then I'd hear one of them move, and then I'd hear the other two move, and it just kept going. It got a little bit more and more stressful just because it never stopped. I really can't stress that enough. It was just ongoing all night long, and after a while, I became extremely exhausted just from being that tense. I even called one of my friends and said, "Hey, if I don't come back tonight, I gave him my location and kind of told him, basically what was going on without trying to, scare him. But, at the time, I still don't really understand what was going on."
So when they were circling around you in that triangle pattern,
Mm-hmm.
were they vocalizing at all, or were they just making it really obvious they're moving around in a circle?
A bit of both. Now, the first part was really more them just making noises and kind of moving around and letting me know they were there. And then at a point, I actually started hearing them make noises back to what sounded like, 2 or 3, maybe 4 others, and deeper parts of the swamp. So I never heard them the 3 that were together, I never heard them vocalize to each other, but every once in a while you would hear, something, whatever you want to call it, vocalize to another member further away. So there was quite a bit of that going on. Mostly whoops is what I heard. I didn't hear any screams. I did hear a couple of grunts, which we'll say about a little bit later, that were happened later in the night. But I didn't hear any what I would call particularly menacing noises. The whole thing felt extremely menacing in general, but it felt more like being toyed with rather than, I don't know. It just, I never was roared at or, screamed at. The night continued a little bit, and at a certain point, I became so exhausted and so fried, for a better term, that I kind of became numb to it, and it was weird. I finally just got tired of listening to it, so I started kind of singing out loud to myself, trying to block out the noise, which was probably a terrible idea. I didn't notice anything really increase or decrease when I started doing that. It was really just trying to not have to hear it anymore. And actually thinking about it right now, it's still quite upsetting. Just feeling like you're stuck and having these things so close to you that it I don't know, it's extremely unnerving. And after a while, I just lost the capacity to handle it, I guess. So I just, again, tried to block out the noise. There was a point in the night, and again, this whole middle section of it is kind of the blurry part for me, because I was just trying to drown them out and not hear it anymore. But, I was still unable to make a break for my truck, because, every time I thought I would have a clear way, I just didn't. Something would make a noise in that area, and I never felt comfortable making the run for it, which is hard to believe, looking back on it, because I was so terrified that, you would think that would be your first inclination. But I will just tell you that I never personally felt like I could do that in the moment.
And you don't have a firearm on you at all?
No, this was not an area where you could carry. Now, I do now. I'll never make that mistake again. But I mean, honestly, I don't know what I really could have done even if I had one. I don't know that I would have used it. It never got to the point where, I was looking at something, dead in the eye that was coming towards me. It never got to that point. So I don't know that I would have made it any better by,
right,
letting a few rounds out. I don't think that would have helped my case.
So the singing their behavior didn't change at all?
Nope. I think they were already so interested in me that, how much, what more could they really do without, taking it to that kind of next level of revealing themselves or, pushing it one step further. But I didn't notice any change. I mean, they were already at full swing, so I think it was, how could it have gotten any worse?
Yeah.
I mean, I say that now knowing full well it could have gotten worse, but at the time, it was just kind of like, well, what the hell, why not? At least I don't have to hear him anymore.
I can understand you falling asleep throughout the night. You have this adrenaline just gets dumped into your body, and then you're on high alert, and you're running 1,000,000 miles an hour. I
think it was about 4 a.m. when I finally, I put my pack over my head and, got in the tent and just covered myself as much as possible so I didn't have to hear it. But at that point, it was like, I figured if they were going to do something, they'd have done it. And maybe by staying up and, singing to them or singing to to myself, trying to cover it up, I was probably only making it worse. So, I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to stay out there any longer and just be scared. So I thought, all right, I'll go in my tent and hunker down and hopefully I wake up in the morning. I did. Everything was, where I'd left it in the morning. Never heard my little perimeter can trick thing go off. I never saw anything. I saw some bushes move, some tree limbs move, but again, I can't say that I ever saw any physical thing. But all night long, I was keenly aware that these things were between 20 and 50 yards from me, pretty much at all times, maybe closer. And they would come forward and back too. I don't think I mentioned that. It wasn't just like they kept a singular distance all the way around. The two would move in and move back out, and they would kind of change their patterns. But it was always moving kind of that what sounded to me like a counterclockwise motion around my camp. Now, I did hear at the end of the night I did hear a grunt that sounded, and again, this is probably, right before I went to bed, probably about 3 o'clock in the morning. I heard this noise and again, my voice, I can't get the depth out of it to really make this noise, but it sounded like, and again, forgive me if I make a loud noise here, but it sounded like, whoop, kind of like that, but much deeper, and I don't know, it sounded like it had, a lot of punch to it, like reverb or, I don't even know what you would call it, but it had a lot of that whoop kind of thing. It was very strange, but, no stranger than anything else that evening. Let's see, right before, and then actually here's kind of the crescendo of it is, kind of right after that, maybe another half an hour, 40 minutes again, time in the middle of the night is kind of hard to tell when all this was going on, but I heard this kind of semi-rhythmic banging, almost like, bang, 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 but it changed tempo or pitch or something in the middle, like it was hitting on a different, like if you were hitting on drums, one is deeper, one is higher. Sounded a lot like that. I can't think of anything else that could have been, except maybe that, there was a highway a long way away, and I suppose it could have been something like a semi or a big truck or something driving over the little bumpy yellow reflectors at high speed, making that kind of noise. But it wasn't rhythmic enough to make me think that it was that, right off the bat. But, just for whatever, that's, I suppose, is a possibility. But after that, everything pretty much stopped. I don't remember hearing anything else. The next morning, I left probably half my campsite there, grabbed everything that I could carry in one shot, got in the car, drove home.
One of the things you said in the beginning, I don't know if too many people caught on to it, maybe I misheard what you said, but so they're moving around in a triangle pattern from where you're at, and where the tip of the triangle is at, it's basically where your truck's at. Were the two coming in, like bluff charging in on you?
The tip of the point, if you will, that was the first one that made this very loud crack. The other two were, directly opposite of me on that side. I don't know that I'd call it a bluff charge, but they came through the bushes, making a whole lot of noise, clearly trying to. The other one snuck up, obviously, right, very, very close to me to break this noise, or to break this branch and make this noise. I never had any clue that it was, it's not like I heard a creaking or footsteps or anything like that. I had no clue. The other two, when they came in that first time, it probably made as much noise in the bush as I actually heard them make all night long. It was quite loud. So, it was startling because immediately, on my right, I hear this noise, and a fraction of a second later, maybe it was 2 seconds tops. You've got, I guess you could call it a bluff charge, but I don't know. I think maybe that's the wrong word because I never really saw anything other than,
I gotcha.
Maybe, some of the bushes moving, the trees moving, and noise. And they never broke like the line of, the barrier of the line of sight, basically. So, and this, I don't know if I mentioned, but this is this is jungle, it's extraordinarily thick. There's a lot of palmettos. They're growing, I don't know, 6 to 10 feet tall, somewhere in that range. So that whole area was just almost impenetrable. And, I thought that maybe there was a possibility that it was some crazy people out in the swamp trying to scare me or something like that. And, there's no way that they could have moved through the bushes like that. I know how long it took me to pick through all that stuff during the daytime, and there's no way at night anybody was going to get through that stuff as quickly as these things did. The way they covered ground was strange because, at any given moment they'd make a lot of noise, and then all of a sudden you wouldn't hear a thing, and then their locations would change. So, they were able to get from, whatever that next point was, or, from their starting point to the next point, deciding how much noise to make. Because sometimes I didn't hear them at all, and they were clearly in completely different locations. And then sometimes you'd hear it sounded like a train or something. It was sounded like a buffalo running through the bushes or something. It was not. And I know how animals sound in the woods too. An armadillo sounds like a raccoon sounds like a bear, and a bear sounds like, whatever. That's very true. But when you're that close to something and it automatically, it blows out your sense of like sounds like a freight train coming through the woods.
Yeah.
There's just no way that's a raccoon. And a bear's not going to work in threes. I've been around bear before. I've seen them. We used to raccoon hunt up in the mountains, and you'd come across scrapes or marks or whatever, and they don't do that. they don't want, unless they're trying to, unless they happen to be tracking you, trying to follow your deer kill, or they happen to want a piece of you. For the most part, they're always going to just go away from you. There was none of that here. This was a calculated. It almost seemed like a military kind of thing. You hear about, how soldiers will triangulate and do that. It felt like that.
They kind of do move like that. They move like special forces,
Very purposeful, as the way I would describe it. Purposeful.
So after this encounter, you started investigating other people's eyewitness accounts. You started talking with different witnesses. You started really going out investigating different areas. What are some of the things that you found? Or can you talk about some of I know you actually had a sighting of one of these creatures, but we talk about some of the different things that you've run into out there.
Sure. Let me start off by, after the first incident happened to me, there's kind of a bit of shock or almost disbelief.
Right.
You kind of second guess yourself. And so I started doing it more just to make sure that, see if I was crazy or not, I guess. And I just needed a little bit more validation, I guess. So I started going on, talking to a few people, and first place that I started working, was a swampy area. Go figure. Was a swampy area just outside of Athens, Georgia. I mean, really close, almost surprisingly close. And there's a guy that had a piece of property where he had kept his storage trailer for, I think he was in like a roofing business, maybe insulation, it doesn't matter. But he had some storage trailers right on the edge of this swamp, and he had a couple of guys quit on him because they had seen, as if there was a monster. These guys quit on him, and then one day he was out there unloading by himself, and he saw something that was crouched over in between his two trailers, like its face down on the ground, real low, like it was trying to stay low. And he stopped and looked at it. He thought it was a panther or something at first, and anyway, this thing had all of a sudden popped up, taking like two or three strides, but on all fours, so whatever you want to call that. And then it popped up on two legs for a short distance to go up over this, what do you call it, like an embankment kind of thing, or almost just like a berm, I guess. And when it went up over the berm, it went up on two legs. And then I think when it went back down over the other side, it dropped back down to all fours. And that was all you saw of it. So anyway, I had gone out there to investigate, and on the first day, actually the first 5 minutes I was out there, he took me right to the spot, and we looked straight down, and there was a couple of prints. They were overlapping, so it actually looked like it had 7 toes. I'm pretty sure it just picked it up and put it right back down, almost very close to the same spot. But it wasn't a huge track. It was probably, I think I have the measurement somewhere, but it was probably about 13 or 14 inches. I mean, it was large, but it was quite wide. It had a very strange proportion. There's no bear in this area, really. So, definitely not bear track. No claw marks, clear toe pads. But it was on kind of hard pack. So it was not an easy area to make a track in. So whatever put that down had to have, pretty good weight to it. He said it was quite bulky, but not because of the way it was built, more just because of the position it was in. It looked kind of just like a blob, until it actually moved. But he couldn't really, it was just very dark, and he couldn't get a good view of it. So I started looking around this area kind of off and on, and I like being in the woods all the time, hiking and stuff, so it's kind of one and the same sometimes. So I would go back into this wetland area, and maybe it was a month or so after I had gone and originally talked to this gentleman, and it's kind of an interesting bit of topography, actually. There's what I would call a hidden bowl in a clear cut. And the bowl basically has woods that's around the edge, and it drops off into the marsh, or into the swamp there. So I'm working my way up kind of the left-hand edge of this bowl, where on the other side of it there's farmland, farmhouses, and there's like an old overgrown orchard. as I'm walking towards this orchard, you start hearing the dog that lives in that farmhouse just go crazy. I mean, really start going nuts. And I kind of stop and listen, and as soon as this dog starts, or should I say stops barking, this very clear samurai chatter. And it was funny because I could tell what the thing was trying to, say to this dog, which was, hey, shut up kind of thing. And it started making this kind of, it was admonishing this dog. It was very clearly like telling it off. It probably lasted 12 seconds. But it was very clear, extremely loud, powerful.
Did it sound anything like this? This is Ron Moorhead's Sierra Sounds CD2.
Just seemed to move right through there.
Yeah, very similar. Yeah, quite similar. This is a weird way to describe this, but it was kind of comical. Again, it was in a clear reaction to this dog barking at it. So I think the intent was very clear, and it had, kind of disapproving, sort of like shame on you, kind of like he was yelling at this dog, telling this dog to shut up. But it was kind of goofy. I think I've heard the Ron Moorhead one before, and it sounds very much like samurai chatter, or something very serious. This had more of like it didn't quite sound quite exactly the same, but extremely close. I mean, I'm splitting hairs really. It's very close to that.
So you're saying it's like the Sierra Sounds, but maybe had a different tone to it when it was directed towards the dog?
Yeah, I think it was, it was probably saying something different, and that's what whatever it was doing, it had clear, it was doing something very specific, and I think, it was saying whatever the hell it was saying. It was, it had a very clear message.
What was going through your mind when you heard it?
Actually, oddly enough, this time, I did not have the same, fear reaction that I had before. I mean, I was still extremely uncomfortable in the woods, and I'm still not comfortable in the woods all the way. But when I heard this reaction, I did not have the same kind of fearful run to your truck kind of reaction. I was really in shock just because it was just so clear and loud, and it was amazing. It's such a strange noise you hear in the woods, and I spent my whole life in the woods, and there's nothing out there that makes this noise. I mean, you could not mistake this for anything else. So hearing that, I think was quite shocking, because you have to process this, and never having heard that before, your brain says, I don't know what the hell that is. But it was interesting. I mean, it was cool. And right about the time he stopped, I don't know. Right about the time this noise stopped, and this orchard was quite overgrown. Clearly nobody had been picking it or anything like that. I could hear brush, popping and cracking as this thing moved off, and the dog kind of stopped barking, and that was it. I've been back to that area a lot. I found a lot of deer kills. I actually even found another, I think it was probably right over 16 inches. I found a track with a very divergent toe. The big toe stuck out almost perpendicular to the rest of the toes. Not quite perpendicular, but close.
It's really interesting that you say that. Someone had come up to me and was showing me a track. I want to say it was Sean, was showing me a track he had actually seen, and this was at Hopsquatch. He was showing me photos of them, and yeah, it looks kind of apish, like the big toe is sticking out to the side and the rest of the toes are forward. Yeah.
That was my kind of first reaction. was, wow, that looks like, what a chimp's toe or, something like that would do, almost like it was there for gripping purposes. And actually the track was on an incline. So it did have, it almost looked like it was, gripping. And I've actually heard that, people who walk around without shoes their whole lives, it's kind of the same thing. They use their toes much more in a grip way than people who wear shoes. And this seemed a bit like that. Trying to think anything else I'd had in, I'd been in that area, like I said, and I found several kills, some bones, bone piles, jaw bones here, there, scattered everywhere kind of thing. And, you find that normally in the woods too, but this just seemed like a kind of a high percentage. I even found a dead goat, that had been just eaten for a long period, out in the middle of the woods. And I suppose that it could have been somebody, killing a goat and then just taking it to the woods to clean it and left the skin behind.
Was there anything interesting about the kill to where you thought, this is Sasquatch did this?
I did find broken bones in there, which I thought were interesting. If something dies from being shot, generally, maybe a bullet will hit, a rib or something like that, and you'll find some rib fragments. But one of the legs did have a break in it, and I suppose that could be something, coming through and crushing. But this, the kill was quite old by this point. It had been scattered. There was a little bit of the spinal cord, the spinal column, and some of the front quarter, I believe, and a little bit of the neck and the head were left. So, clearly coyotes had probably gotten onto this, and it was not by any means a fresh kill. So honestly, I couldn't give you a whole lot of information about that and be real sure about it. But I will say that just the amount of carcasses in the area was well above what I found to be average.
Jack, was this in the same area that you had your visual sighting?
No, it's the same river system, and it's very, very close, but it's on the other side of the swamp. And I was living in an area that, actually bordered a lot of farmland and had this beautiful river bottom that ran through it, and then had a lot of woods on the other side and kind of ran out into the south end of nothing. And there was a river trail that I would run with my dogs in the mornings and sometimes in the evenings. Great wildlife, river turtles everywhere, otters, just really nice bit of wildlife. Closer in than you might expect to the city. Not in the city by any stretch of the imagination, but also not that far either. They were clearing some forest for a subdivision on the I'll call it the city side. So I was running down through this trail, and I got to a point where, there's a lot of curves because it follows the river, of course, but there was a straightaway and this beautiful bottom where it looks like there's clover and it's like a meadow of clover, but it's covered with a canopy. So it's kind of the shaded, beautiful, beautiful area. And I come around this corner and I look down at the end of the straightaway where it enters back into kind of heavy woods. Crossing the trail, or just beginning to cross the trail slowly, too, wasn't moving quickly, was this large black figure. And I would guess I'm probably 120 yards away when I first saw this thing. And I looked at it, and the first thing that popped in my head was, wow, that's a big homeless guy. I don't know why. That was the narrative that immediately came to mind. And I'm moving forward at this point, and it starts to, kind of glances in my direction, and I couldn't really tell a whole lot when I could see it move, but I was moving, and so I didn't really get a great look when it turned, and it didn't turn a lot. I mean, you're talking about just a kind of minimal glance, turn of the shoulder kind of glance thing, but I didn't really notice, like a big head, a big shoulder swing. It wasn't exaggerated at all. And as I'm looking and I'm getting closer, as this thing crosses, I get kind of a better look at the dimensions of everything. And again, I never got particularly close to it, but I could see the arms and the legs, in the general frame. It was quite lanky, not bulky at all, but quite tall, and singularly black all over. No Again, if it was a human, you would think there would be some clothes or something, but it was a single black color all the way around. And the next thing I really noticed was the length of the arms. They were just too long. There's nobody that, that has that kind of, that look. It's just, immediately you can tell. It's like, oh, that's not right. And at this point, I'm actually I'm moving pretty good. I've got 2 dogs that are, pulling me, and we're going towards this thing. And at that point, it just goes directly across the trail and goes into the woods, and disappears. It lasted 3 seconds. I don't know, maybe not even that. And again, from the time that I came around that first corner to where I actually got to the point where I realized I was looking at something strange, very short amount of time. Not much at all. Probably took me another, 8 seconds to get, maybe 10 seconds to get down to where I thought, or at least get close to where I thought it was. And when you get there, the trail goes up and to the left. The creek stays, or the river stays on the right. This thing was going perpendicular across the trail and directly into the river. When I got there, I looked around. There was nobody there, and this river is big. I mean, it's not like a little small creek. I mean, it would take me, God, even if I could reach the bottom all the way across, let's say I walked through it, it would take me 3 minutes to cross, if I was in waders or something like that. So I don't know, let's just say this was a big guy in the woods. I don't know where he went, but he certainly didn't stick around, and he didn't go anywhere there was a trail. Again, it's not the greatest, but because I was so far away for the part that really would have been interesting to see up close, I was probably 100 yards away, maybe plus or minus. So I can't really give you a whole lot of detail. Only thing I can say was the build. Really long arms and not bulky, not the Patty style whatsoever, but much more of a lanky basketball player build.
That's interesting. And what time of day was this?
Let's see, it probably was 4 in the afternoon, 5 maybe.
And your dogs didn't react at all?
When I don't think they ever saw anything. Again, they were down, they're much closer to the ground. So they were in kind of the bushes and stuff, and I'm looking up and over and all the way down at the end of my, area that I could even see. So I don't think they had the same perspective that I had. Now, when we got up to the point where this thing, I think, had crossed, they sniffed around a lot, but they never seemed panicked. They didn't seem scared. They were just kind of doing what dogs do, but maybe just a little bit more other than normal. They didn't act like they wanted to track anything, but they didn't whimper. They didn't whine. They weren't scared of anything. So, I don't know. But whatever this thing was, it was, it was going someplace, and it didn't really seem like it cared that I had seen it at all. And again, my first thought was, oh, there's a homeless guy living in the woods, but, there's no way he was this size, and there's no way he had arms that went to his knees. It's very unlikely.
With your description of the long arms and just kind of being out of proportion, one solid color, I think we can narrow it down to what it was and what it wasn't. I agree with you. It doesn't seem like it's a homeless guy, especially with the behavior. Now, do you still go out and investigate and talk with witnesses?
On occasion, I do go to a few places, not with any real regularity. It's one of those things that I think if you're going to do it, you really have to put in the time, and it's not a high, your chances are not great. It's not like you're going to go out there every time and expect to hear something. So I think it takes a lot of time, but I every once in a while I'll stop in one of these places and take a look and see, but a lot less than I used to.
It's interesting. Your very first encounter with these things reminds me, I had a guy on one time. It was, I have to ask one of the listeners for help on this one, but the story goes, this guy was in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, and he was a police officer, and he went out with his sons, and they were camping, and these things just circled his camp, almost identical to your story. The only difference between your story and his story is these things actually threw stuff at him while they were circling his camp. But I bet it felt a little bit like cat and mouse, sitting there watching a cat play with a mouse.
I ask myself that all the time. I have no idea. That's kind of one of the things that still bothers me is, what do they want? I don't know. I really would have expected that, again, if they were trying to, let's just say they're trying to eat me, you would have expected the two to ambush first and run me right towards the other one, not keep me in one spot. But the only, and again, this is sort of an emotional reaction at the time, but the only thing I could think to do that I felt comfortable doing was nothing. I believe me, if I felt comfortable running towards my car, towards my truck, I would have been diving through the window as soon as I could have and would have driven out of there at 100 miles an hour. But I never felt like I had a clear shot. So what they wanted me to do, I have no idea.
What a terrifying night. I don't think a lot of people would change positions with you to have that type of experience. I bet it felt like a Mexican standoff or cat and mouse like we've been talking about. Were you able to utilize the experience at all for any of your courses? I know you said you were taking biology and anthropology.
I was in two classes, in an anthropology class as well as a biology class. And biology class was doing stuff based in wetlands, so that's why I was in a swamp. And then the anthropology paper, I think I ended up writing actually sort of about, unknown hominids. It was always something that I found interesting, but after you have an experience like that, it puts a bit of, a different perspective on it. But honestly, what can you really say? I got scared in the woods. There was stuff circling me, but I never had any visuals. I didn't smell anything. I did hear a lot of weird noises. And again, something that to me sounded like a howler monkey. The only way I can really describe it is it has that pitch change in the middle that almost sounds simian or sounds like a monkey. But I never heard any menacing noises other than breaks. And I heard that one grunt, which didn't even really, that wasn't all that menacing. I think it was just kind of like a harumph or like a blah kind of thing. But I never felt like they were, I always felt like they could attack me at any given moment. And so it was very powerless feeling. But again, had I had a weapon there was never a point where I would have felt comfortable using it.
Like it would have turned a bad situation worse if you would have.
Probably. Yeah. Again, I'm sure if I'd had one come, through the bushes and it looked like it was coming right at me, of course you're going to do what you're going to do, but I never felt like I even really could tell, even if I had a shotgun or something, I don't think I could have aimed it well enough to hit any of these things. And there was so much cover that, the chances of you being able to actually defend yourself in that situation at night, I still don't think it would be very good, even if you're loaded for bear. I don't think your odds are great. Not with the way they moved, and there's just no way. There's no way I could have hit it.
No,
I'm sure there's somebody out there that's, I'd have shot it, or but I wouldn't have. So
no, not in that situation. I tend to agree with you. I think that would have made a bad situation much, much worse.
Yeah.
Your encounter fascinates me. I think the behavior is what fascinates me more than anything else. Trying to figure out what they were doing. Obviously, you felt like your impression was that you weren't going anywhere. And that's kind of the feeling I get from hearing the story and hearing the location, how they moved around. It's very fascinating to listen to that type of behavior. Jack, thanks so much for coming on tonight and sharing your encounter.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. Pleasure. Take care, Wes.
Join me this Sunday for the retelling of the Bauman story that President Teddy Roosevelt wrote about. My guest this Sunday will also be Brian. Brian had a very, very fascinating encounter with him and his friends. They were out shooting bottle rockets off in the middle of the forest, just having fun as kids. It happened many years back, and one of these creatures walked up on them while they were shooting bottle rockets at each other. Very, very fascinating encounter, and there was a lot of witnesses to this encounter, along with witnesses that had seen strange things around the property. So Brian will be sharing all of that with us. If you've had an encounter, email me, wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Until next time, everyone, have a great night, and I will see you back here on Sunday.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
19th century Idaho. Two trappers set out on a beaver hunt deep in the Bitterroot Mountains. The two men were warned not to go deep into this area. A year prior, another trapper's body had been found, ripped to pieces and half-eaten. Rumors abound that the young trapper had been killed by a half-man, half-monkey type creature. A young frontiersman at the time, and the only survivor to the incident that took place, Bauman recounted his story to Teddy Roosevelt. Along a remote stretch of Montana's Wisdom River, the two men decide to set up camp. Both men briefly leave the camp to go set up traps for the night. Upon returning, their campsite is demolished. Everything has been gone through, and their lean-to had been torn down. As night fell, the two men were undaunted and began to set up their camp again. The men start to find human-like tracks all around their camp.
Look at these tracks.
Remembering the several warnings the men had received not to come into this area, and the previous trapper that had been killed, the men began to panic.
They look like the ape-man tracks.
Both men had decided to call it a night. Bauman was awakened by the sound of rustling and the foul stench of a wild beast. He immediately rose up and fired a shot. Both men then heard something tearing off through the woods. Bauman and his partner were unnerved by this and decided to abandon the camp at first light.
You go ahead and pack up. I'll go get the beaver traps.
Whatever was harassing these two men was still around. Bauman and his partner made the mistake of separating. Bauman headed down to the river to retrieve the beaver traps, while his companion said he would take the camp down and meet him downriver.
Jack, where are you at? I heard a commotion.
When Bauman arrived to the new campsite, he found his partner sprawled out on the ground with his neck snapped and a set of bite marks on his throat. He knew at once a menacing forest beast was responsible. At the horrific sight, Bauman took off running. As an old man, Bauman would recount the story to future President Teddy Roosevelt. Until Bauman's death, he would always say the wild man had killed his friend. Not an Indian, not a bear, but a wild man had killed his friend that day. President Roosevelt was so struck by the story, he wrote about it in his 1892 book, The Wilderness Hunter. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Hope you enjoyed the Bauman story. It's a tough story to tell because there's so many different moving parts to it, but there's a lot in that particular encounter and a lot of warnings in that particular encounter. Don't separate from the group. Don't go off, stay together in a group. And I think that's really the moral to the whole story. People can say it was a shooting, they can say this or that, but I really think it's not separating when you're out there with people. But thanks for being here tonight, everyone. I really appreciate it. Got a great guest on for tonight. I'm going to be speaking with Brian. Brian had a very interesting encounter, very up close and personal type encounter when he was a child. Before we get to that, if you get a chance, please visit SasquatchChronicles.com. For additional shows throughout the week, if you've had an encounter, email me, wes@SasquatchChronicles.com. Well, I want to welcome Brian to the show. Brian, thanks for being here tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me, Wes.
You had an encounter when you were a kid. You guys were off shooting fireworks and ran into one of these things. Tell us a little bit about the property. Had you guys had any other experiences prior to the sighting?
Well, I'm from Texas originally, and my mom is from Louisiana, so my grandmother still had property there, and we would go visit quite often on the weekends. And she had about 5 acres it was all piney woods out behind the house. And then the next door neighbors who had kids my age at the time, well, they were still my age, had about 10 to 15 acres that had a large pond on the property. And then it had out, behind the property was all piney woods for miles and miles and miles. There was a train track that ran through behind the property heading north-south, and that got removed for some reason. And so you had a high, a elevated flat space that you could walk on for miles. And this town was between what's called DeRidder, Louisiana, and Lake Charles. So, I mean, there was, it's a little town, little yellow flashing light. It's a kid's paradise. You could shoot, shotguns and target shoot and ride. We had 3-wheelers back then, not 4-wheelers. Motorcycles. The kids next door had horses. We'd go ride horses.
Very, very rural setting.
Oh yeah. You get up in the morning, you go run around the woods all day, come back when the sun went down, basically.
Prior to this, did anyone in your family ever mention anything about these creatures or talk about anything weird going on around the property?
No, the only thing that was, and I don't remember if this, I think it was before, the only weird thing we ever witnessed was there was, and I can never remember the name of it, and it was only after I heard it on YouTube that it clicked to me that's what it was. Basically one night, the whole family was standing out behind the house listening to what sounded like the hyena type screaming.
I gotcha.
I think it was the Umatilla screamer is what the video's called. But and my grandmother said, "Oh, well, that's a cougar." I was a little kid, so okay. I guess that's a cougar. I mean, it didn't sound like a big cat to me, but...
Let me try to cue some of that up here for the audience. Here's a little bit of the Umatilla sounds.
January 21st, about 11 p.m. I'm a couple hundred feet from my house, and you hear it going off in the background right now. Kind of sounds weird. Kind of sounds doggish, hyena-ish, but you can hear it going off in the background right now. It's really kind of strange, just to say the least. It's been going off for about 15-20 minutes so far by the fire station. And it's pretty crazy, so if you can listen, that'd be crazy. Hold on. I mean, that almost sounds like laughter. It's actually gotten closer since it started. It's probably only 200 feet, 300 feet from me right now. I don't know what it is or what that is going off right there. You can hear it.
When I very first heard that, there was, I thought, that's strange. I don't know that I've heard that type of audio before. And what's strange is I couldn't place it with anything I had personally ever heard in the woods. And it wasn't until I saw a video from the early 90s about these kids that were out in the woods, and they were actually out looking for Bigfoot. And this thing started going off like the Umatilla screamer, and it was coming at them, and it just freaked them out. And that's strange. So you heard that out there. You guys, the whole family had heard that.
Oh yeah, it was me, my brother and sister, my mom, my dad, my grandmother, and we listened to it for probably a good 10 minutes. I remember actually getting bored because you're a little kid. Yeah, that's cool. Oh look, a bright shiny object. Let's go play with that.
Yeah.
So, but it was, it was weird. And again, it was pawned off as that's a cougar.
Yeah.
And, again, this is western Louisiana. I didn't really think there, and again, nowadays, looking at it through the eyes of an adult, there really weren't a lot of cougars around there as far as I know.
Yeah, and that particular sound really isn't a sound that cougars make. You think your grandma, was it your grandma that said she thought it was a cougar?
No, it was my grandmother, and she flat out said that's what it was.
Oh, I gotcha.
You know, because we were all going, well, what is that? You know, my mom, what is that? And, you know, she just, oh, that's a cougar.
Yeah.
End of discussion.
So you guys were hearing strange things around the property, kind of like the Umatilla sounds. Can you walk us into your encounter? Kind of tell us what you were doing, who you were with, and walk us right into what happened.
Yeah, I'm already getting goosebumps just talking. I've told this story to 100 times. We were having the classic bottle rocket war, which is probably why they don't sell bottle rockets anymore.
I can't say I haven't done that myself.
Yeah. You know, we survived the 80s. How imagine. Anyway, it was me and this kid named Philip, and he is about 11, 12. I was just about to turn 11, and my brother and his brother were on the other team. And we had been shooting, you know, these things at each other, and it was dark. It was full on nighttime. And it wasn't just the area around my grandparents and their neighbor's house. You know, other people were shooting off fireworks as well. And since it was a very rural area, you know, you were getting, people had some pretty good size, you know, professional grade fireworks.
Right. The
that
homemade.
you could, possibly you could see it at a distance. But we had been going at it for a while, and Philip and I had decided we were going to try to sneak up behind, you know, and flank them, you know, my brother and his brother. So what we decided to do was run all the way to one end of the property, which has the pond on it. And then beyond the pond, on the far side of the pond, the ground slopes down to, I guess they call it a bottom. And it goes down a good, you know, 20, 30 feet at about a 45-degree angle. And then it flattens out, and it's straight piney woods probably for about 2 miles. And so we run around back there, and it is pitch black. I have a flashlight that's one of those old yellow, you know, 6-volt battery flashlights, a big square clunky thing, and a big bag of bottle rockets. We run around behind there. We go down to the bottom of the embankment, for lack of a better word, and we're not there just a couple seconds, and we're leaning against the embankment when we hear this heavy breathing coming from behind us. And if you've stood next to one of those gigantic Clydesdale horses, that's the volume of air that it sounded like. Plus it kind of had a bit of a rasp to it, and it started walking towards us. And it's pitch black. All we can, you know, you might see like one tree and in front of you, and then it's pitch blackness, you know, beyond. And it's walking on 2 legs towards us. So, you know, I got the flashlight, and I'm, you know, 10, 11 years old. I'm about 5 feet tall, and I turn it on at chest level, and I'm staring into basically a hairy wall. And then, so I'm like, what is that? And then I follow the wall up, and then I am met with glowing yellow eyes. And that lasts for about a heartbeat before the hand comes up and blocks the eyes. And it was like 3 heartbeats, staring at a hairy wall, seeing the yellow glowing eyes. Hand goes up. We turn around screaming like little girls, trying to claw our way up the embankment to get away. Drop the flashlight. We're tearing it out of there, screaming bloody murder. Everybody else, all the other kids, start screaming because we, come up the top of the pond and running down the side. And Philip's house, his dad's house, was closest, so he ran there. I ran to my grandparents' house where my parents were, blabbering about a monster in the woods. I mean, and of course, there's no monster out there. you didn't see a monster. You saw something else. You saw a tree. I mean, you didn't see a monster. And no, we saw a monster. Philip can tell you we saw a monster. And, his dad told him you didn't see no monsters. The next day we got back together. I had also dropped my big bag of bottle rockets, and being 10 years old, I kind of wanted those back. So we got Philip's 12 gauge semi-automatic shotgun. I had a 16 gauge shotgun, and he had his dad's 357. And we walked around to the top of the pond before it led down to the bottom where the woods were, where we saw the thing, and stood there. Well, there's the flashlight laying on the ground, and so it's like, there's my bottle rockets laying on the ground, and it's kind of like, okay, go get them. No, you go get them, kind of thing. It's, we stood there, we were all talking tough up until we got there, and then it's like, nah, it's okay. I'll wait till somebody, about 5 other people show up, and then I'll go get them. The next night, Philip's dad, now these, it's country setting, and, he's got an area next to the house where they had built literally we called it the tree house, but it was basically a cabin on stilts, a 1-room square building on stilts that was about 12 feet off the ground. They had welded a metal ladder together to be able to get up to it. And we would, play in that and, slide down the ladder and all this other stuff. And the next night, Philip's dad woke up and saw what he called a man wearing a fur coat standing out by the treehouse. He opened the door and yelled at the man, and then when he did, the fur-coated, and this is July, fur-coated man ran off. But then he realized, and he's telling us this later, he realized the guy's head was bumping up against the bottom of the treehouse, and the treehouse is 12 feet high. So that was the only, 2 times that something like that happened. There was another time where the kids next door had a swimming pool, one of those above ground metal frame swimming pools. The mom told us if there's a coyote on the loose with rabies, and if something comes up and tries to get you, just stay in the middle of the pool and you'll be okay, and just yell for the house. Which, young kid logic, that sounds reasonable, but as an adult looking back, it's like, well, how's a coyote with rabies, A, getting into the swimming pool, B, and if we splashed water on it, it would probably run away to begin with. So, and she said that the men there's a gas line, like, station. There's like a big gas line running through this area, and that's where my grandfather worked. And this kid's mom said, well, the minute the gas company said they had seen it walking around the gas company. I mean, that kind of looking back, it kind of didn't make a lot of sense that, there's a rabid coyote. Usually they don't live very long once they go rabid. But, to warn us about it while we're playing in a swimming pool is, a little unusual.
That is very unusual. In that situation, you wouldn't think, like you said, with the coyotes, man, just splash a little water and they're out of there, whether it's rabid or not, it's going to take off. How old were you when all of this was going on?
I was about 10 to 11 years old. This all happened probably within a couple of years. And we would go there, maybe, twice a month on the weekends, and then longer in the summertime, to visit the grandparents and This all happened right around 79, 80. And the only reason I'm positive it was 4th of July is because of the fireworks. And it was hot. If it was fireworks and cold, it would have been, New Year's.
As you got older, did you ever get a chance to talk to your buddy Philip, his father, and talk to him about that man in the fur coat?
Yeah, we had talked about it. We didn't talk about it for the longest time. And it probably only took about, I guess because we were kids, it only took about, a couple of months before we, stopped hanging around the house and started venturing off into the woods again. Philip's dad was, well, just make sure you take a shotgun with you. I mean, whenever we would venture away from the house and went roaming in the woods, he always told us to make sure we took a shotgun with us. And it was loaded with double-aught buck. So, I mean, the size of this thing was pretty good. I mean, I felt like when I was looking up at it, my head was all the way back. I'm looking up at a, really very high thing. So.
Did Philip's dad ever change his mind on it being a man in a fur coat?
He did, but he didn't. You know what I mean? He's one of those guys, it wasn't a man in a fur coat, but he wasn't going to tell you it wasn't a man in a fur coat. He would just say, yeah, it was kind of weird. That was odd. It looked like, he goes, yeah, it looked like a guy wearing a fur coat. Well, what was it? Well, it looked like a guy with a fur coat.
I gotcha. What's interesting about him saying that is I have had other witnesses on. I had a guy in Washington State one time, and he had seen a creature, and at first he thought it was a guy in a fur coat, until, kind of like your situation, the guy was huge, and it was out of proportion for a human, and it didn't make sense. It was in the middle of the summer, and it was quite a ways away, and the more he looked at it, the more he started to realize, holy crap, this isn't a guy in a fur coat, this is something else. Sometimes it's easier not to address things and just chalk it up to explaining it like a man in a fur coat, and yeah, that was weird. Sometimes people do that for psychology and for their own mental well-being rather than address it as being something strange.
Oh yeah, no, I know, no doubt. I mean, it took me, there was for the longest time I didn't talk about it. One time when I first started, when I got quite a bit older, I asked my mom, because then I started thinking, did I actually see that? Did it actually happen? So I talked to my mom. I'm like, hey, do you remember, when we were little, that 4th of July where we came running up saying there was a monster in the woods? And she was like, oh yeah, I remember that. You guys thought you saw, Bigfoot or something out in the woods. I had never used the word Bigfoot. But, of course, yeah, here it is. It was probably later, like late 80s, 1990s before, when I asked her about it. And, of course, by then Bigfoot's everywhere. But, and when I was a kid, I never, I'd seen, like, there was a couple movies that came out. And of course, the elementary school library had the monster books that, had a picture of Patty on the cover, and I always thought they're up in Washington State, so I'm good.
Yeah.
We're safe down here.
Godspeed, Washington State. We're good down here.
Yeah, good luck, good luck, folks, because we're down here in the South, in the Texas area, and we're good. But now, with everything else going on these days, it's like, okay, Texas, kind of scary.
Yeah. How far away from the creature do you think you were?
Wes, I think I was at least 10 feet.
Wow, so you were really close.
I think if I had waited to turn the flashlight on, I might have been closer. But yeah, when I hit the flashlight, it looked like I was standing in front of a dirty, shaggy brown carpet.
And that's interesting, that description. Was it, were you able to get any facial features or anything like that from what you remember?
No, I was, the moment the eyes, I hit the face, and I know it was like, boom, boom, like I hit the face, and the eyes started get, massive eye shine because it was a pretty powerful flashlight. I was so focused on that. And then, I felt like I was rooted in place. And then when the hand came up, and I remember the hand more than I do the face, because when the hand came up, I remember it had hair hanging down, and it had, the palm was like a almost black.
Right. Yeah.
And it was like a big mitt. I mean, it was like somebody had some crazy looking, baseball mitt on. It was just huge. I just remember it, covering its eyes. And then that's, a bear. There's not a lot of bear in Louisiana. And bears that shield their eyes with their hands are pretty unheard of, I'm sure.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And did the creature vocalize or anything?
The only thing it did was when it was, we noticed the breathing, and I'm sure it didn't change. I mean, when we, ran down to the base of the hill, I'm sure it wasn't hiding. It was just, I think it was biding its time because there's so much commotion going on. That's kind of been the conclusion I came up with. It was passing through, but there's all this commotion going on. Well, let me just hang out here till everything settles down, and then, later on I'll pass through. It was breathing. I felt like it wasn't breathing heavy. It was just such a big animal. It was expelling so much air. It was breathing. It wasn't like winded, It was just it was so big. It had like huge lungs. It's expelling all this air. Like it's breathing in. It's just, these big lungs, and it's breathing out, but it had like a rasp to it. But it didn't like scream at us. It didn't vocalize in any way. In all the years we would, run through woods, I never heard whoops. We never heard wood knocks. I never heard whistling that seemed weird. We never heard anything like that. And that night we didn't hear anything.
Yeah, the breathing is very strange. I have heard that before, and it's just to how you described. The only one thing I would probably add to it is it reminded me of kind of like a sick animal, because of the raspy.
I'd agree with that. It like it had a cold or something.
Yeah, kind of just like a sick animal, like a very large sick animal, but kind of reminded me of a sick animal. As you got older, did you talk with your friend about what happened?
Yeah, well, we kind of never really talked about it. I don't think it was one of those deals where it was like, hey, remember that time, the 4th of July? Yeah, I remember that. And that was it.
Right. Let's go get a beer.
Let's go get a beer, because we don't need to go through that again.
Right.
We don't need to discuss it. We lived it. What else is and it wasn't, a very long encounter, to be sure, but it was long enough.
Yeah, and it was one of those encounters that's very up close and personal. Now being an adult, looking back on it, because sometimes it's hard to reflect on it as a kid, but as you get older, I know you've probably, I'm assuming you've replayed this in your mind over and over again. What was your impression of what it was doing?
Like I said, looking back, I feel like it was hanging out. It was just passing through. I don't feel like it was there. But then again, if I look, you're talking about it now, it was there 2 nights. The folks next door, they had horses, and they had a barn on the edge of the wood line that had horse feed, and it was that maple and oats horse feed. That's, I'm sure would be delicious for these guys to eat. And it's not like they had one of those really cool big red barns. They had a barn that had an open front that you could just walk into, and it was open. It didn't have doors on it. It just was open. So they would store these oats in that barn.
Right. So there was lots of food, easy food, and.
Oh yeah. There's lots of food. There's lots of deer. There's natural springs that bubble up out of the ground, around the area. I mean, right near the property. We would, go roaming through the woods and drink out of it ourselves. After that, the only thing about the property was my grandfather or my grandparents. Their house was it was pier and beam construction, so it had concrete blocks that would hold it off the ground about 3 feet. It didn't have a concrete slab. It had these concrete blocks and pier and beam construction to hold it up off the ground. Because Louisiana is real moist, and houses would sink. They had a window on the back of the house that was at about 10 feet high. That was about 1x2 window, and that window filled me with such dread at night because I just knew it was gonna be standing there looking in at me.
As an adult, looking back on your situation of it coming up on you guys, what do you think what was your impression of what it was doing?
That's tough to say. I mean, I kind of get the feeling it was saying, okay, I could go with the move along, nothing to see here, beat it. I could go with, oh, hi guys. Here, let me help you with, let me help you out with your spinal column.
Right.
I mean, it's either, okay, okay, kids, go home, or, oh, thanks for bringing dinner. I'm not one of those, friendly force giant types. And, I'm more it's a wild animal.
Yeah, it's very interesting how it stopped when you turned around and hit it with the flashlight. Like it was coming. You wonder what would have happened if you didn't have a flashlight, or if you guys hadn't turned around and hit it with the flashlight. How far up close would it have come?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I kind of don't want to know what that might have been, because, I definitely hitting it with a flashlight, I think surprised it. Like what, like, oh, you can see me now, one of those deals. Yeah, I really don't know. I kind of don't want to know what would have happened, definitely, because it probably wouldn't have been good for me.
Probably one of the most fascinating parts about your story is firing off bottle rockets. Probably every wild animal within 10 miles had probably headed for the hills as soon as you guys were firing off those bottle rockets. But with these things, it doesn't, loud bangs, gunfire, doesn't really seem to shake them up or make them run.
Yeah, that was one thing, that makes, like, people that I've told the story to, that were like, oh man, there's no way something would have been there with all that stuff going on. Part of me could conceivably think that, hey, it's walking through the woods, it's hanging out, and then it sees like all these booms with big bright flashes and colors, and, then there's the part where the kids are running around yelling and screaming and drawing lots of attention to themselves. There were 5 kids under the age of 15 running around in this area.
Yeah.
My brother, even though he's older than me, he's kind of small in stature. I mean, there's a million reasons, and, since neither one of us, like you like to say, are studying one in our basement,
right?
We can't test it.
Yeah.
We can't. What do you think of this big bright flash, sir?
Yeah, and that's the interesting part, is that, any other wild animal is going to bolt from the area, and that the fact that this thing didn't run, and it really wasn't, like you said, you turn off the flashlight and it's kind of surprised. I like your description of the hand. Every person that I've talked to that has had a really up close encounter and has seen the hands, they describe them the same way, like oven mitts or like a catcher's mitt, just huge when they see the hands. How did this affect you from seeing this at such a young age and then kind of growing into an adult? How did this affect you?
Well, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, I was pretty young. I still on occasion have a nightmare. I mean, I'm 46 years old. I'll be 46 this month, and I still on occasion will have a nightmare about it. I have a good career. I'm a professional person. I was in the military, so I don't think it adversely affected me. But, there is still the stigma, like, telling people, hey, this happened. I actually had a coworker try to use it against me because I told him about it, and then he tried to use it against me to make me look like, look what he believes. This guy believes in monsters. At a company party. My boss goes, "Oh, you saw the Lugaroo," and kind of shut him up.
Yeah, I'd like to take that guy out to Texas with me.
Yeah, me too. but he's kind of a douche, so
That's
he
even
don't
better.
necessarily wouldn't. Yeah, yes, it would. That would be good. It's the whole thing, you tell people, and for a while it's like, no, seriously, there are these things and they're out there. But did it keep me from, I still go camping. I have a daughter. When she was little, we would do a camp, every summer we'd go camping. It didn't keep me out of the woods forever. It kept me out of the woods for a while. I think mostly it's the believe me factor, you know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, no, I get that completely. And it's hard too when you've experienced something, you're trying to tell the truth, trying to really come forward and say, hey, I saw this, and then you get kind of like what your coworker did to you. You get that from a lot of people. I understand it, but it's frustrating in the same sense. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I went to, in the state of Texas, in San Antonio, the Natural History Museum had a Bigfoot exhibit, which I thought was, and this is like 2003. I went to it. I took my wife at the time to it, and she was a big naysayer. Oh, I don't believe it. You saw, I don't know what you saw, and we walked through this whole exhibit. They had all kinds of artifacts. They had old videos with Krantz and different people. They even had this replica of the Skookum cast. And at the end of the tour, they had a life-size cardboard cutout of a Sasquatch that's on your website with the two Sasquatches and the guy. They had one of those, and it was holding two buckets. And they'd give you a token as you went in. And the bucket was labeled, I believe, I don't believe. So you would drop the coin in the bucket, whichever you chose. And, of course, I put mine in the believe because I certainly have seen. But it's amazing to me, after looking at all that evidence, that the I don't believe bucket was so full.
And that's, and like I've always said, until one's dead on the table, we can talk about all the things we want under the sun, but until one's shot and brought in, and I hate to say I promote shooting one, but I kind of do promote shooting one. I mean, and that sounds very cruel, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, but at the end of the day, that's what needs to be done. It has to be, and I think it has to be done once and brought out publicly, and then after that, I don't know about shooting them after that, but it needs to be done once.
Yeah, I am pro kill for the for the purpose of proving. I'm also pro kill in the interest of preserving your life. Definitely. I think that until one is brought in and there's a body on the table that's, not a costume stuffed with, deer guts. I mean, an actual specimen. And people will still scoff at it. But they will, say, okay, they exist. And you know what though? I think that a lot of people would be like, in this day and age, okay, they exist. Big
Right.
deal. Gorillas exist too.
And you're right. That's something that Mark Zasky brought up, and it didn't really hit me until he was saying that. More people care about what Kim Kardashian is wearing rather than monsters in the woods. And I think you're right. I mean, I really do. I think it would come out. The only downside to that, of it coming out, I think a lot of other questions would come out that someone would have to answer. For example, when you talk to a lot of Native people, or you talk to some researchers, or you talk to people that investigate missing people, a lot of them will tell you kind of the same thing, that these things snag kids,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll snag women and children, and sometimes men. I know down in Oklahoma, some different tribes, they'll talk about these things eating people. And, as I was listening to your encounter, I was thinking about that missing boy. I just posted it up on the blog about the missing toddler in Idaho, how he just vanished.
Yeah.
He's got his grandfather there, he's got his mom and dad there, they're in the middle of nowhere, and he just vanishes. And now they're saying, well, maybe a wild animal got him. Well, even a toddler is going to scream out, is going to cry out bloody murder if a cougar gets him, or, there's going to be a mess somewhere of these animals, any wild animal getting them, except for Sasquatch that can pick it up, take off running with it. And I think that goes on, in your situation, why the hell is it walking up on you guys, and you guys are shooting off bottle rockets, and it isn't until you put the light on it? You know what I mean? Stuff like that I think goes on, and not every situation, but I think in some situations that does go on where people do come up missing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. I've read the 411 books, and, how you can look at some of the accounts, and especially the older accounts, the Native American accounts. There's a Indian Choctaw reservation in East Texas. And I remember going there as a kid because my dad, took us there. They had a replica of a settlement, because the Choctaw Nation was considered one of the 5 civilized tribes. They called themselves the 5 civilized tribes of the Native American culture. They had 15-foot wooden post, tree walls. It had walls around it. And the entrance was a narrow, a long, skinny, narrow, basically, hallway that one person could walk through, and getting a horse through there would be a challenge. If you had a fat horse, he's not getting in there. But, I just, looking back, I thought, I think why, well, first of all, didn't know that they actually built fortified installations. And before, the white man came, what do you guys control this whole area? What are you fortifying it against?
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, when you talk to a lot of the different tribes, like here in Washington State, and I've talked to some of the Choctaw members down there in Oklahoma, but the ones here in Washington State, when I talked with him...
Yeah, I remember you talking about it on one of the shows.
Yeah, they were just, stay away from Mount St. Helens, stay away from this area, because these things are in there. And, it's interesting, when you talk to a lot of these tribal members, if you ask them, they'll tell you. Most people say they won't talk to the white man, but I really haven't found that to be the case. Most Native people, if you ask them, they'll tell you why they did certain things in different areas, and they'll tell you a lot of stuff about the creatures on the reservations and stuff they've run into. But you're right. Why are they fortifying? That whole area was Choctaw area. Why are they fortifying?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The whole subject is, it's fascinating to me, especially, coming from, like
You've seen it. Yeah.
It's not a faith-based, I know they're out there kind of hippie thing. It's, because you've seen. I know because I've seen. Now, what I saw might not be the exact, it might be the southern breed of what roams around Mount St. Helens, or there could be 4 types. Who knows? Like has been discussed. Early 1900s, late 1800s, people were more apt to say, oh yeah, they're these weird, crazy, wild men. You just got to watch out for them. Unlike now, where it's like, no, that's not real.
Yeah, it's become a joke.
Yeah, no, that's not real. Come on. Whereas 100 years ago, it's like, oh yeah,
Yeah, they'd put it on the front page of the paper about the wild man. Another encounter with the wild man.
Yeah, well, the wild man was seen again, yeah, so I think it's kind of interesting. Plus, I don't know, do you think, Wes, that if somebody hit one with their car, let's say, that it would just disappear? Or do you think it's, the local police would be like, oh, hey, everybody, the local news, get the local news down here. Look, check out what we, or is this just going to be one of those swept under the rugs thing?
I think it would get. I think that's happened. I really do. I think that's happened probably a few times. And the shooting of them, that's happened a few times.
Oh, yeah.
I've talked to people that have shot them. People that have. I've actually talked to people that have hit them with their cars, or have seen. I had one lady on that. They were describing this wrecked truck and several state troopers there, and what looked like a gorilla laying on the side of the road. So I think that has already happened several times over. I think it gets swept under the rug. One of the other things I posted on the blog, I think it was last week, was the Pennsylvania 911 call, where the guy said he shot one. All the cops they're laughing, and what's interesting about that case, because I think this guy actually shot a bear, but what's interesting about that case is he said, I have a body. All the radio chatter stopped on the police chatter. All of it stopped on the radio. Then there was a helicopter, a military helicopter, immediately flew out to the area and was scanning, basically mowing the, I guess what they call mow, when you go back and forth, just mowing the area.
Yeah, search pattern.
He said, just complete search pattern. Now, why are they sending a military helicopter? Why is that immediately sent out to the area where this guy says he shot a Bigfoot? When he's saying, hey, I shot it, it's a big joke, they're laughing about it, how much has this guy been drinking? You can hear the cops snicker back and forth. And then he says, I have the body. Everything gets really serious really quick. So I think it has happened, and I think it would get swept under the rug. You'd have to be kind of tricky on how you brought one in.
Oh yeah. The guy on the lead into the show, who, calls 911 because he has a prowler. And then it steps into the light and he can see it, and he's like, holy, get somebody out here, and you can tell the old guy fights to keep his composure. And the 911 operator is like, what's going on now? He goes, he's describing what he's looking at. And, you read the story online and he doesn't want to say there's a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch outside my house and I'm looking at it. He's like, it's a big person.
Right.
Supposedly the cops responded to that. They actually came out. There was an officer who responded to that. You don't get the rest of what happened? What did the cops see? Did he show, when he showed up, what did he do? What did he, we've had, on your show, you've had the law enforcement guys that are like, with the old couple, they tried to grab me off the porch.
The 911 call with that guy, I know Ron Moorhead knows him, and the guy really wants nothing to do with Bigfoot, wants nothing to do with this topic, and he did see a Sasquatch, but he didn't want to come out and say, I saw a Sasquatch, because he didn't think the cops would come out to help him. So it's a fascinating topic. It'll be nice when this comes out and we'll all be vindicated. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, Brian, and sharing your encounter, and I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome, Wes. I think you're doing a great thing. It's kind of like Sasquatch Anonymous. Hi, I'm Brian, and I had a Sasquatch encounter.
Yeah.
It's therapeutic for a lot of people, and the fact that it's not a clown show. You don't approach it. You approach it very seriously. It's fun. Your show's fun. It's entertaining, and but it gives people a chance to get it off their chest in for lack of a better word, safe place, because they know you're not going to be like, unless they come on and say, I mind spoke with the thing before it, interdimensionally jumped to, Alpha Centauri, but
yeah, no, and you're right. I mean, that's I had a little fun with Ray the Spaceman, but
that was great.
Even some of those stranger encounters, I've been wondering about. There's one I was thinking about having on. The guy has a very, very interesting video, but I honestly think what he is experiencing is something more on the demonic side.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't like to hear that, but what other wild animal can talk to you, through telepathy? The answer is none. Okay, well, what people can talk to you through telepathy? The answer is none. Well, what other entity that you've heard about can talk to you via telepathy? And in a lot of poltergeist encounters, a lot of demonic encounters, you'll hear that sort of behavior. And so, I mean, I really think a lot of these people are experiencing something, but I don't think it's Sasquatch related.
Yeah, my just one quick thing. My daughter, she's in her 20s now, early 20, and she was working as a sitter for the hospital for terminally ill patients, and just to make sure they don't get up and wander off. And she's seen people start talking to Jesus like they're having a conversation. I mean, there's no one in the room, and there was a lady, yes, Jesus, thank you, tell my mama I'll be there soon. And the next day, she's screaming at the devil, get out of here, devil, I don't want to talk to you. I mean, like you're having an argument with someone in the room, and there's no one there. And, the first time she saw it was kind of unnerving, and she talked to one of the nurses, and they said, oh yeah, well, I hate it when they start doing that because it means they're going to die soon.
Yeah.
And, that was the nurse. And, so she didn't work that job very long.
I don't blame her.
Because it was a little disconcerting, to be sure. But I like we had discussed before, I'm sure there are many, many things, in reality that we are not aware of.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure there is.
And Sasquatch just happens to be one that not everybody's aware of, but it's a flesh and blood creature. It's a damn dirty ape, like you say.
Yeah.
It's kind of grabby at times, especially to young people. So I would prefer it to stay on its side of the fence, so to speak.
Right. Well, thanks again, Brian. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you, Wes. I appreciate it too, man. You're doing a great job.